Excellent. Here we are on the first Friday of February. Um, mm, Here we go. And this is going to be a really interesting topic to get into. I'll say a bit more about this in a moment, but as ever, it was the topic chosen by our Primal Happiness Facebook group members. And as the month's gone on, I can really see how this is something that is kind of like outside of our awareness a lot. It isn't actually something we tend to talk about a lot. This whole idea of genius and zone of genius. And the more I thought about it, the more I could see why it's not something we tend to talk about, because it just honestly isn't available to many people without some other things being in place first. So I'm actually really looking forward to getting into this. We're going to have to go deep because it is the only way of really being able to see what's required for us to be able to live and work in our zone of genius. As ever, there isn't really a magic bullet, sorry to say. But we will get into all of that wonderful stuff in a moment. Is there anything else I need to say before we get going? Oh, just to say, this is the first time you've watched me do this live, this is the live recording of my All the Everything show that goes out on the podcast. So in a moment, you're going to hear me say hello all over again. That's because that is the start of the show proper. So if everyone can see and hear me perfectly, we are in a good position to get going, I think. Just check I've got my notes. I'd actually forgotten I was doing this until this morning. I was laid on my bed writing a post, just feeling like just like breeze into my day, and then it suddenly hit me. I've got all the everything this morning, and I'm just completely I wasn't prepared for it. And then I remembered my past self wrote a load of notes a week ago. So thanks to my past self, we do have a show. If that hadn't been the case, I still would have done it, but it probably would have been, a little bit more slapdash than I would have preferred. Okay, right. I think we're ready. Welcome to February's All the Everything. Welcome. This month's topic is one of those ones that is deceptively deep and juicy. And I actually saw that more and more as time went on from the point it was voted by our Facebook group members. So there is so much here that we're going to dive into in a moment. Really excited about this one. So as ever, we're going to start first by diving into what I've been consuming in the month of January, and also what I've been creating in the month of January. And then we'll go into that lovely topic, living and working from your zone of genius. So what I've been consuming, I decided, because I tend to almost always talk about a book that I've been reading, because I do read a lot, I decided to change it up. I was actually planning to talk about a book I've been reading yet again. I was like, do you know what? I'm going to talk about something else, something different for a change. And then I couldn't decide. I don't actually watch very much television at all, but the television I do watch tend to be very kind of, let's say, carefully chosen. I'm not someone who will just put the television on and then just watch whatever's there. In fact, if my husband's not here, I won't turn the television on at all. It's dead to me. I don't even really know it's there. So there's like a real intention brought to what I do watch. And there's a couple of things we've been watching recently. One is the new series of Vikings, which I absolutely adore. It's one of my total favorite television programs. And I was pondering as I decided to talk about this, I was thinking, why do sorry, my dog's decided to chime in on this. Come on, in your bed. Why do I love it so much? And there's lots and lots of reasons. I love oh my gosh, so much about it. I love the kind of wildness of it. I love the different, like, such a variety of characters. I love the plots. I love the, like, the way people dress. I love the kind of divinity in it and sacredness in it. So much. I think the thing that I love most is we get to see in a couple of the characters there true sovereignty, which is so rare, so rare, both out there in the world, but even modeled in television programs, films. It's very rare. And there's a couple of characters in particular that I would say, and over time, I wouldn't say they kind of came out the gate right from the first season like this, but certainly as time went on, both Lagertha and Ragnar in particular really modeled what sovereignty looks like. And I'm not going to say too much more because I don't want to spoil it if you've not watched it or you're kind of like a few seasons behind me. But if you watch it through that lens, looking for the modeling, this absolute sovereignty, taking complete responsibility for their lives, making choices that are in alignment for them, even if it's going to cost them approval, cost them potentially even their lives. That is, again, there's a quality, an energetic quality that they're modeling that we really benefit from seeing. So if you haven't watched Vikings, go watch it. It is a real treat. The other program I really adore, and it's back on again at the moment, is New Lives in the Wild with Ben Fogle. I'm guessing he's English, and it's an English program, but I'm guessing it's available elsewhere. And it's about people, sometimes families, who have gone and created a completely new way of living in some form of wilderness. And the wilderness varies massively. There's people living on remote Pacific islands. There's people living in the wilds of Scotland. Honestly, you name it, there's probably been someone on that series that has lived there. I remember another one that was kind of in the depths of maybe Kenya. I can't quite remember where it was, but like surrounded by what we would describe as kind of safari kind of animals and landscape. So it's so gorgeous for showing you something that's available to us outside of our kind of like this linear way of living in this like specific domesticated, nothing else is really available, and it just blows your mind wide open of like, oh wow, it's possible to live like this and then like this and then like this. And what I also really love is it gives you the opportunity to start to see what's important to you. So some of those lives have qualities that I think, oh my gosh, that's what really matters to me. That's what I really value in my life, or that's what I'd like to have more of, some real inspiration there. But it also sometimes shows you things that are missing from their lives that really allows you to see like, oh gosh, that's non-negotiable. So specifically, some of them are quite lonely. They may not express it that way. Maybe they don't actually experience it as being alone, or lonely, but they are alone, either as an individual or as a family. And it feels to me that, maybe that is an alignment for them. So I'm not going to make any judgment about that. But it certainly seems to me that as humans, we are a cooperative species. We evolved living in small groups, in bands of people, around kind of usually like 40 to 100 maximum. And we tend to do best when we're in that kind of like deep community, a real integral, woven in part of that group of people. And seeing these people on this program who have so many things in place that we're lacking in our typical modern domesticated culture, such as deep communion with nature, living in a way that's most alignment for them, as opposed to kind of like a conditioned way of living where you must do this, must do that. They're often, making a living in a way that's really in alignment for them. Very sustainable, like so many qualities that are amazing. And it really highlights like that part. And again, I'm talking personally, but also what I see is probably true for most of us. Without that sense of community, but without that sense of being part of something greater than us, including other humans, it does feel like, oh, that part is so important, and it almost is highlighted more when all the other things are in place. So if you haven't watched it before, I would really recommend it. And I think, I guess, you know, like everyone, he's you know, not to everyone's taste, but I think Ben Fogle's a great presenter. He's just so just humble and funny, and just, yeah, prepared to get into anything, make an absolute twit of himself. So I think he's a particularly good presenter for it too. So yeah, I would really recommend both of those programs. And hey, don't say that I only ever talk about books, because this might only be a once a year thing, but I can talk about something else. Okay, so on to what I've been creating in January, and oh my goodness, so much. It was one of those kind of like, what do I choose? And I was like, I'm not going to choose any of them. I'm going to talk about them collectively, and then perhaps pull out some things that I'm seeing that seem particularly worth talking about. So in January, we've created and are in the kind of execution of 3 brand new crucibles. So we've got Wake the Wild Medicine, which is our circle of 11 people on the path of becoming their medicine, that deep gift that they are, working to be able to embody and express that in their lives and specifically in their work. But ultimately, you know, there isn't a dividing line as far as I can see, as per the title of this episode. You know, whilst I've said living and working, I've said that just to really I guess answer what a lot of people are wondering, that how do I work in my zone of genius? But really, it's all living. It is all living. I'm only making that distinction so that it's, I guess, addressing something that I know is important to people. So that's our, amazing 6-month-long, brand new circle for people on this path of waking their wild medicine. And there's not a day that's been going by lately that I haven't just been like wanting to pinch myself, like, how the hell did I get this lucky to be doing this work with these amazing people? It's incredible, like blown me away. What's possible, and the depths they're going to, and the connections they're making with each other so fast. We're now just over 2 weeks in, and it's just nothing I've ever experienced before. I mean, like everything we do goes deep. We're not available for anything other than that. But this is something I've never seen before to this extent. It's just incredible. Very much testament to the people, where they are, what they're available for. There is some kind of magic going on in there, but it's amazing. Also created Waking the Wild Gold, and this is a funny one. It was in our plans, but I hadn't mentioned it at all. Hadn't said a word about it publicly. And then one of the women who's previously done Waking the Wild Feminine had decided that this was the year that she really wanted to kind of be in her genius, and was walking in the desert and kind of like contemplating, you know, how do I create that in my life this year? And then saw a vision of me and decided like, oh, okay, yeah, Leanne's the person to go to for this. So she, you know, off her own back, messaged me, said, is this something you offer? I was like, well, funny you should say that. We don't. We're planning to. Maybe this is when it's meant to happen. So we've begun that work, and it's a very different crucible to anything else we've done before. Much shorter, but incredibly deep. So it's, assuming it stays as is, I mean, we're always looking at kind of like learning, how should this evolve? So right now it's 2 sessions. One is a kind of deep dive into discovering the gold that person has come here to be. Sorry, the dog's being a pain. We'll ignore him and then hope he gets dealt with. And then there's a follow-up ceremony, which is a way of integrating what's come up from the first session, but also what's happened in between, because there's often a lot of work that happens sometimes subconsciously. So I'm just going to see if my husband can shut the door. Sorry, super professional as ever. So this is very energetically intentional and yeah, very deep crucible, even though it's much shorter than what we currently do. And it certainly isn't for everyone. It's probably only going to be suitable for people that have already worked with this in some way. But yeah, it feels so perfect for now, so magical. So if you're someone who has journeyed with us through one of our crucibles before, and you're feeling that call to really embody your goal, that kind of genius that you are, and maybe that's clearer after you've listened to what I'm about to share on living and working from your zone of genius, get in touch. We're not booking right for sessions right now. We're going to be looking a bit later in the year, but let me know, because there will be very limited spots for that. And then the last one that we've launched this month, or last month rather, is something again very specific. And I've no idea if this is something we're going to be doing again, but in I guess similarly kind of bespoke mediums. But this again was for a particular client who reached out to me. She's gone very deep in previous crucibles with us, and there was really feeling the call to embody the Empress archetype. And anyone that's followed any of our work before will know that archetypes are absolutely baked into everything we do. And I see, if we're alert to it, if we're aware that this is happening, we get to hear or see or feel the call of a particular archetype that is for us and will help us actually express that deep truth of who we are. And so this past client was feeling the call to embody and express the Empress archetype in her life. So that's the work that we're in right now, very specifically created all around that. And again, just such magic happening there that, oh gosh, like right now it feels as though there's my own mind is being open to the possibilities, like the different ways we can work with people, how deep we can go, again, when we have such an intentionally energetic crucible for that particular person and that particular piece of work. So yeah, very busy month of creation, but very magical, and yeah, very aligned. So feeling very grateful for all of that right now. Okay, I think we're ready to dive in to living and working from your zone of genius. Before I go into the real juicy stuff on this, I want to say first and foremost that the term zone of genius was coined by an author called Gay Hendricks in his book, The Big Leap, which is actually a really good book. So I'm going to say at the outset, I probably will be saying some things that have been taken from that book. I read it years ago, so it's not fresh in my mind at all. So I'm having a bit of a nightmare with children in the background. Give me a moment. I'm going to ask for certain things to be quietened down so that this isn't being broadcast. Give me a moment. Okay. Sorry about that. It's life in lockdown, children at home, dogs being disturbed by children. If you're a parent, you probably know exactly what this is like right now. So I'm going to likely talk about things that Gay Hendricks talked about in The Big Leap, and I'm going to go completely off piste and talk about it in the way that I talk about it and I see it, and that we collectively, Jonathan and I, see it in terms of the work that we do with people. So I'm, to be honest, because it's so long ago since I've read that book, I have no idea where that crossover is. So I'm going to credit him right at the outset and say I am probably going to be borrowing some of what he talks about there. I don't honestly know how much that is. And I'm probably going to say some things that are completely in conflict with what he says there. So if we can just start with that in mind, I'm then just going to kind of like just dive off and say whatever comes, just knowing there are going to be things that are taken from his book. Okay. So I'm going to start by just talking about what it, from my perspective, means when we're talking about that zone of genius. Like, what does it even mean? And for me, it really is that deepest part of us that we in our work might describe as our soul, or certainly our soul's path in this lifetime. We might describe it as our deepest gifts. We might also describe it as our medicine. And so this is, again, that part of us that is unique to us. Sometimes before, when I've talked about this idea of there's ascension to spirit and then descension to soul, I sometimes talk about this idea of there's a kind of an ocean, and going back to the Rumi quote, you know, we're not a drop in the ocean, we're the ocean in the drop. I see we're both. And there's a paradox there for sure that it's quite hard to hold. But right now, when we're talking about our genius, when we're talking about our soul, we're talking about us as a drop, recognizing like, yes, we are at the same time the ocean, but we are a drop. There is something, I believe, you don't have to believe this, but it certainly looks like this way to me. There is a unique part of us that is a gift that we came here to this lifetime on this planet to give to the world, to be in the world. So that's what I'm talking about. When I'm talking about zone of genius, I'm talking about living and working from that place. Everything we do is in alignment with that, is chosen from there. So that's, I'm going to now go into a lot more of how that even happens, what's required. But I just want to say at the outset, when I'm talking about that, that's how I define it, which is probably very different to how other people might define it, including Gay Hendricks. The other thing is, and I think this is actually a really helpful distinction that Gay Hendricks makes, is between our zone of excellence and our zone of genius. And what can happen is, because again, we're in this domesticated culture that doesn't really help many of us live from, in fact, it actually gets in the way of us living from that deepest part of ourselves. We find ways of being that work to a certain extent. You know, sometimes to a great extent, sometimes we can actually be really successful living in our zone of excellence. So these are the things we could do that we are really good at, could get paid really well for, have us seen as successful by society, have us liked and approved of. And that can be really hard to let go of. And I'm going to talk more about that in a moment. But I really want to, at the outset, make a distinction between zone of excellence, which may be what you've done that's got you this far, and zone of genius, which again is that much deeper, unique part of you. And to a large extent, we need to be willing to let go of operating in our zone of excellence in order to start to then operate from our zone of genius. And so even as I'm talking, you're probably starting to get some thoughts come up of, so is what I'm doing right now zone of excellence, zone of genius? And as I talk further, I think you'll start to get a sense of how you can tell which that is. It's not immediately obvious from the outset, because sometimes there is it can seem there's more crossover than there actually is. So I'll give you an example. Some of the things that are in my zone of excellence include things to do with like websites, marketing, just that kind of whole area around, you know, putting something online. It was my previous job. My previous job was running large websites for corporates. So it's something I can do very, very well, very easily. I often enjoy it. I can kind of get into quite a flow. And yet it isn't really what I was put here to do. And without becoming available for the thing I was really put here to do, it's very easy for me to justify And sometimes this won't even be a conscious justification. It could really easy be for me to justify, like, oh wow, well, this is something I'm good at, can get paid well for, I enjoy doing. Why would I do anything else? And so that's what I'm really wanting to, right at the outset, make a distinction between those things, which in our culture are seen as like the holy grail. To be able to do something like that, like be in our zone of excellence, is seen as like, you know, doesn't get any better than that. And I promise you it can. So that's, I'm just going to really hopefully like have made that clear before we go any further, because I think it's really important to know that's what's available to us before we even start to look at like, well, what does that look like? To how do we make that happen? So for me, and this is both personally and also the work that we've been doing with people for years, is any time that we're looking expanding into those deepest parts of ourselves, it really needs to come with a commitment to knowing ourselves. It really does need to be a deep, deep commitment to walking this path into understanding ourselves as clearly as possible, which on the face of it doesn't sound too bad. But of course, what's going to be there is a whole lot of stuff that we've kept in shadow. And I've done episodes, I think the one before last, I believe, was all about this idea of finding your golden shadow. So if you haven't watched that or listened to that, I would suggest go do that, because I go much, much deeper into this idea of why the two things kind of like come as one. Like, in order to live as our gold, our gifts, our deepest essence, we also have to be willing to go into shadow to collect that gold. So I'm not going to go into too much detail now, but I'm really going to make it crystal clear that like we absolutely have to go there in order to be able to live as our genius. We really need to be able to be willing to go to the place that's going to be hidden, which is in shadow. And that is, as far as I've seen, true for all of us. There isn't a way of kind of somehow leapfrogging over the shadow, over those parts of us that are hidden, are things that we've been shamed for. There isn't a way of just leapfrogging over that and then kind of like, and here I am, hello world, here I am in all my genius. It just does not work that way. So there has to be, first and foremost, a deep commitment to do that work. And again, I go into that in a great depth in that episode. It's called something like Finding Your Golden Shadow. And that's essential. So let's first and foremost assume, just for the moment, that you are already on that path. Like, if you're not, that's fine. Listen to the rest of this episode. But that is really where all of this starts from. There has to be that choice to do so. From there, when you're on that path, and this, just to be clear, isn't one of those like, oh, there's a point where we're suddenly like ready, free of shadow, and we're here. This is a path that we walk deeper and deeper on. And even just to be somewhere on that path makes us available for this next level of choice, which is to be committed to living as our genius, living from soul, whatever word you want to give to it. And again, because we're talking about zone of genius, I'm going to talk about genius probably more than I normally would. But again, that needs to be something we're choosing into. It's certainly not going to be handed to us on a plate, I'm afraid. It's something that we need to choose into, knowing that a lot of people are going to have a lot to say about it. And a lot of that won't be something we're going to want to hear. Like, we are really going to need to proactively choose, that is how I'm going to show up in the world. That's how I'm going to live. That's how I'm going to work. So with that said, that's really why this work of understanding ourselves and starting to create that integration, where we're taking what's in shadow and integrating it into our system. Another way of saying that is becoming sovereign. is becoming available for living in a way that we choose rather than a way that we're being compelled from fear. And that fear can be sometimes quite subtle. We're going to, when we've made that commitment again to live from our genius, we will be absolutely tested on it culturally and also by whatever's in shadow. And so that fear is going to be reflected to us, probably, you know, from people telling us this from outside, or it could be our own thoughts coming up, where the decisions we're going to have to make to live like that, we're going to be told are things like greedy, self-indulgent, egoic, selfish, spoilt, harsh. That's one I know clients often say to me, like, by living in this way, it can come across quite harsh, like you're just kind of just doing what you want and don't care how it lands on other people. Cold, and also unfair. And so these are things that we're either going to be telling ourselves or other people will be telling us, that will act as these kind of detractions, these ways of pulling us away from this path. And that's going to be true for all of us. So that's why, again, it is essential we're in this work to integrate the shadow and be sovereign, not be compelled by fear. And as I say, this isn't going to be a kind of binary, like one day we're coming from fear, the next day we're not. This is going to be a path that we go deeper and deeper on, to the point where we can say, you know what, most of the time now I'm making choices that are sovereign. They're not being compelled by fear. So again, that is always going to come up. I wish it were the case that we could just make that decision, like, from now on, I'm going to live and work for my zone of genius. Like, I just know it can't work that way. We will be tested on it, because we've all got this fear that's held in shadow that is going to be activated by all this stuff that's coming in towards us. But that's also why making that deep, deep choice, that commitment, this is how I'm living, this is what I'm committed to, allows us to be much more kind of graceful and flexible in the face of this. And this is also something that I think is important to know, that we're not meant to do alone. If we go back actually to what I was saying earlier about new lives in the wild, in indigenous cultures across time throughout the world, that's what we'll see. We'll see that we have support in all kinds of ways from other humans, which will include elders and guides and mentors. But we'll also have support from the wild, and we'll also have support in ways that to our modern minds seem just like out there, like just don't make sense. And so that could be guidance directly from the divine, that could be guidance from archetypes. There's so many things that, if we're aware they're available, we can call in as part of our team. We really don't have to do this alone, and I actually don't know if we can do it alone, honestly. And so making ourselves available for the help that actually is there is not as obviously available as it perhaps would be, again, if we were being raised in an indigenous life way, but it is still available. So recognize, like, you don't need to do this alone, and you do need to proactively be available in all these different ways in order to get this help, get this team on your side in order to be able to live this way. And again, be able to be powerful, make sovereign choices in the face of all these ways that you're going to have life show up and tell you this isn't the right thing to do, this is selfish, this is self-indulgent, all the rest of it. Where shall I go next? Let me just take a breather and have a mouthful of tea while I think what else would be helpful. So the power of making a decision at that deep, deep level is also what helps us to do this. I listened to one of my real favorite authors lately, called Aidan Wachter. Wachter, that's his name. And he's actually on our podcast recently too. And he was talking on the Glitch Bottle podcast, which also, I love that podcast, all about magic. And he was talking about the word decide. And he was saying he's similar to me, like real word geek, and loves looking at the roots of words. And he was talking about the way it's interesting how the word decide, the ending of that is the same as words like homicide and insecticide. So this idea that something's dying. And he was saying through that lens, we can see deciding as we decide one thing and then everything else is killed, is dead to us. And I love that. I love that energetic in that idea of deciding. That's such a powerful way of realizing, like, if we make those decisions that are aligned for us and we've made them from a deep enough place, a deep enough commitment, everything else is killed off. Everything else drops away. So from there, what we're then available for is very different. If we've made that deep commitment that I am going to live as my genius, knowing, there's going to be probably work to do that, but ultimately that energetic of being in my genius is what I'm deciding now. That means that as life comes up and challenges us on that, tests us on that, as different decisions need to be made about, do I do this, do I do that, we have a much deeper decision that's already happened that makes those other choices much, much easier. So it means that we're not having to constantly choose, like, I'm going to be in my zone of genius on this, I'm going to be in my zone of genius on this. It's making that choice in a like made once way. Like, that's how I'm living life this moment forward, no matter what. And of course, sometimes that won't look as, I'm making it sound like, oh, so we've made that, and then kind of like life parts like the sea and it's all easy. It isn't. But having made that decision from a deep enough place, that really does empower us to make aligned decisions across the board in life, everywhere. And even when we might, for example, realize, like, right now it's not possible for me to stop doing this thing that's in my zone of excellence, we're at least choosing it from a sovereign place with the understanding, okay, this is what I'm doing now. In fact, I can give you an example. It's literally is coming up for me right now. So we are finally in what I really hope is the last month of our big, we call it a rebirth. So it's our relaunch of everything to do with our brand, our website and everything. And it's been in the works for, I can't even tell you how long. It's embarrassingly long. And because of my background in online, I end up doing a lot of the kind of, designs and fiddling around with code and all those kind of things that really I really shouldn't be doing. And it is so tempting, because these are things that it is quicker for me to just do than ask someone else to do. And so it's a sneaky little thing where we can choose into doing these things and can do it in a way that seems really justifiable. And again, when we've made that deep commitment, it's so much easier to spot when we're doing that, when we're pulling the wool over our eyes and making decisions that really aren't in alignment with that deeper choice. So for me right now, that looks like I'm doing some of that work with the understanding it's putting me in a position where we can then pass that on to someone else, bring on a website person who can take our list of this is what we want and go do it. And that wasn't really something that would have been possible until I had that kind of deeper commitment and understanding of what it was really in my zone of genius, which is very much coaching, teaching, writing, doing things like this. It really isn't me fiddling around with code on a website. So that's a really recent example that's coming up for me where, again, I can see that I am making a choice to do some of it, but that's made from a sovereign place, with the understanding that the deeper commitment I have here is to stop doing that and to move that onto someone else. Okay, let me take a moment and see what else is going to be helpful to talk about. Let me think. So I think I'm going to just now really specifically talk about it from a work perspective. So, what I'm going to say now is going to sound a little bit fantastical. And yet I'm going to say it because it's very much what I've seen to be the case. The more we are living and working, and again, from this particular lens of work, working from our zone of genius, the more life lines up in alignment with that to support us being there. I see there is a deep, divine, let's say, plan for all of this, which includes us being like that, living like that, working like that. Is how this was all designed. We're meant to work from our zone of genius. And so when we are doing that increasingly, life aligns with that. And that could look like, for example, if you are a small business, if you are in your zone of genius, whatever that is for you, that will naturally result in you being more successful in terms of, whether you want to measure that as, number of clients or amount of money flowing in. That's what I see over and over again. When we really are in that zone of genius, working there, life flows naturally towards us. And again, in the aligned ways, we get not just an abundance of clients, but we get the clients that are perfect for us, perfectly match us being in our zone of genius. And of course, that again isn't something we can just decide. This is something where we make that commitment and then we start little by little, energetically cutting away everything that isn't for us. And so sometimes this will look like much more consciously chosen boundaries, but there is really much more a kind of deeper energetic play where we become available only for things that match that energetic frequency of us being in our zone of genius. And I so appreciate when I've started to wear things like energetic frequency, it can sound a bit like woo and out there. My invitation to you is, what if what I'm talking about here, like showing up from the energy of you knowing you are a gift, knowing that you embodying that gift and expressing it into the world, working in your zone of genius is what's going to allow you to have the life and business that you want. Like, that's what I'm talking about. It sounds again a bit like weird when I'm talking about energetic frequency, but that's what I'm talking about. You being that and deciding it even before life is like the material plane hasn't quite matched up to that, because that sometimes can take time. We make that decision to embody that energetic of our zone of genius, knowing that the material plane will align with it. Sometimes, and some parts of that will happen instantly, some parts will take time, but they will happen. But the place that we're needing to make decision from is very much that, again, energetic choosing into, like, I am deciding that is how I'm going to live. Okay, right. Is there anything else? So I guess in terms of, like, what does this look like practically, as to if you're listening to this and you're thinking, right, I'm really feeling that's a choice I can make. How does that look like? What's those kind of like next steps to take? So I'm going to really just need to recap everything I've said here, because everything I've said is what's needed. The first thing is to devote yourself to knowing yourself. Without that deep commitment to understanding all parts of yourself, even and especially those parts of yourself that have been hidden and you're ashamed of and you can't believe the world wants, those parts especially are needed. So the first thing is that deep commitment to knowing yourself. Second thing is, and that has to be already in place, you need to be walking that path to even be available for this next decision, which is to, I'm going to, and again, you might have different wording. Like for me, the decision was a few years ago, I'm going to live from soul. You don't need to use my words. For you, it might be, I'm going to live and work in my zone of genius. Whatever that is, there needs to be a point where you make that commitment. You make a choice. This is how I am living. And knowing that kills off all other options when we've made it from a deep enough place. And then the last thing is receive all the help you need. You almost certainly cannot do this alone. And why would you want to? You will have help of all kinds if you become available for it. So I've mentioned some of them already, and I'm going to recap on that because I think some of these are ones that we just don't know are available in our modern culture. So probably one of my biggest forms of help, probably bigger than all other kinds, is my connection to the wild, is my connection to my special tree, is to my daily going out onto a wander, onto the land, and being in the space that really supports me being in that deepest communion with my soul. That is help that I think is essential. I really do think that's essential. I certainly, if it's not essential, it's like, again, why would we try and do it without something that is so beneficial? It also can come in the form of guides and mentors. Obviously, that's something that Jonathan and I are offering to people. We're not the only people that do work of this kind. It might be that someone else is the right guide or mentor for you. So go look. The people for you, and it can often be many people, they do exist out there. Allow yourself to be open to receiving their support. And again, this is one of those things that we are just so deprived of, really, in a modern culture. But the ways that we can receive support from like non-physical sources, which can include archetypes, can include whatever your relationship or your naming of God, source, the universe. It can also include whether you again name this as your spirit guides or allies, like that help is there. It is there. And you don't need to believe me and trust me on that. Like if you just start to open yourself up to even have that inquiry, like, is that true? Is that available to me? You'll have your own experiences that will give you that answer. So my only invitation to you is to like be open to perhaps that being something that is available to you. So, and of course, the other part of this is there's the kind of like, real human aspect of the people around you that could give you help that right now probably seem like they're doing the opposite. So as we start to only become energetically available for that's in alignment with us, we start to notice that our partners, our friends, people that we work with actually can support us in ways that we just didn't think they'd be available for. And so that is something that I just see over and over again. Like people can really surprise us when we're starting to live from that place. Life aligns to support us. In fact, I haven't got this prepared because I wasn't planning to. I'm going to read a Terence McKenna quote that Jonathan and I are just obsessed with at the moment. And it just is perfect for this. It's just loading. Nature loves courage. You make the commitment, and nature will respond to that commitment by removing impossible obstacles. Dream the impossible dream, and the world will not grind you under. It will lift you up. This is the trick. This is what all these teachers and philosophers who really counted, who really touched the alchemical gold, this is what they understood. This is the shamanic dance in the waterfall. This is how magic is done, by hurling yourself into the abyss and discovering it's a feather bed. I mean, that really does say it all. And that absolutely has been my experience. It can sound as though what I'm talking about, like this level of sovereignty, this level of responsibility, this level of living life full out, would be harder. My experience is like anything but. It feels, I was saying something the other day, it feels a bit like playing life on hard mode, but somehow managing to play it on easy mode. That's been my experience. Like it really is like when we do make that choice, like I'm throwing myself into the abyss, it does turn out to be a feather bed. It turns out life is rushing towards us to support us with that. So that's everything I feel that I have to say on this topic for the moment. If you've got any questions, let me know. It's certainly something there's like more and more depth we can go into, just not right now. So let me know what comes up for you. If you want more of this goodness, whatever this is, if you're watching this on the Facebook Live and you're not already a regular listener to our podcast, go check that out. We're on like 308, I think, episodes. So plenty there. And that's at primalhappiness.co/podcast. If you would like to go deeper with us, if you'd like Jonathan and I to be your mentors, your guides, your teachers, go check out our Go Deeper page, which has a list of all our crucibles. And that's at primalhappiness.co/go deeper. We don't currently have any openings available. There'll be kind of different things coming up over the year. So go look. Some of the things you can already register your interest for. It tends to be that everything we put out does get sold out quite fast. So it's always worth, if you're feeling drawn to something, register your interest and then you will be the first to know when we open it up. And lastly, if you're not already a member of our gorgeous Facebook group, go do that. So as I mentioned at the start of this show, this topic was chosen by our wonderful Primal Happiness Facebook group members. We have a poll every month and you can get to decide what I'm going to talk about. You get to vote on it. So there's also so many other reasons for being there. Honestly, it's just such an amazing group of people. An example of this, I did an interview. Actually, I was being interviewed by Phil Goddard on our podcast last week, I think it was, on the topic of my father, his death, our relationship, the gifts I've taken from all of that. And I asked in the Primal Happiness Facebook group, do you have any questions for me on the topic of death? Expecting them to be fairly like, I don't know, like practical questions about, I don't know, dealing with bereavement or something. And they were so weird and wonderful. The questions like just gave me one of those moments of like, what an incredible group of people. Like the questions spanned everything from past lives, future lives, ghosts, oh my gosh, like so much depth, so weird and wonderful in all the best ways. So if that sounds like your kind of person, go join us. You're very welcome. And that's at facebook.com/group/primal happiness. I think that's everything for this month. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have a wonderful weekend if you are here right now listening and watching on a Friday. More again next month. Mwah. Lots of love.